Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my Endless Diary Tales channel? Thank you so much. Living again, I became a completely different person. This time, I avoided every possible chance to come into contact with Michael Shaw. When he came to our troupe for a performance visit, I pretended to be sick and hid the whole day. When he got a cut on his leg during a hiking trip, I immediately went to call his sweetheart, Emma White, to help treat his wound. When I heard that he was going to be stationed at a grassroots post, I seized the moment when the college entrance exam system was reinstated and registered immediately, determined to get into a university thousands of miles away in the capital. All I wished for was never to see him again in this lifetime, because in my previous life I had loved him for 40 years and been neglected by him for 40 years. Before I died, I found out that he had always kept Emma in his heart. He blamed me for standing in the way of their relationship. Even when I was gravely ill, he was busy arranging his and Emma's wedding as if it were the most natural thing in the world. My daughter Lily was thrilled, running around helping them, completely forgetting about me. They left me alone in the nursing home to die in loneliness. Such a miserable life. I would never live it again. When news spread that the visiting performance troupe was coming, the whole camp buzzed with excitement. I was still half asleep when my roommate Mary Lee shook me awake. "Hey, wake up. Weren't you the one who kept talking about seeing Michael Shaw perform? He's finally coming. Hurry and bring him that gift you've been preparing for weeks." "What performance? What gift?" I mumbled in confusion. Wasn't I already dead? My thoughts were a mess. I opened my eyes and saw the banner hanging directly across from my bed, the one that read 35th Troop. That's when it hit me. I had been reborn. The chatter in the hallway outside only confirmed it further. Mary tossed me a damp towel, laughing. "You must be losing your mind from excitement. But I really admire you. After all this time with him treating you so coldly, you still haven't given up. If it were me, I'd have run off ages ago." I gripped the warm towel in silence. The suffocating pain I'd felt before dying in my last life still lingered. I could still hear Michael shouting at me, calling me the other woman, and I could still see him and Lily smiling happily with Emma under the willow trees. If that's how it was, should I really let the same tragedy happen again? Slowly, I wiped my face, hung the towel back on the rack, and crawled under the blanket again. "I'm not going," I said quietly. "You all can go watch and stop talking about me and Michael Shaw. We have nothing to do with each other. It'll just give people the wrong idea." Mary and the others froze mid-motion, staring at me as if I'd grown a second head. "Grace, what's wrong with you? This is Michael Shaw we're talking about. The man you've been crazy about for years. You even bought him imported chocolate. Don't think we don't know. What are you switching tactics now? Playing hard to get?" They burst out laughing, teasing as usual. I couldn't blame them for not believing me. Everyone in the troupe knew how foolishly I'd chased after Michael before. I'd done so many ridiculous things for him that if I told them I could eat a whole cow, they'd probably believe that more than me saying I'd given up on him. I didn't bother to argue. I just looked at the box of chocolate I'd kept hidden in my locker, took it out, and unwrapped it. "I'm really not going. I must have caught a chill last night. My head's killing me. Tell the troop leader for me, will you? And here, share these among yourselves." Jenny, one of the girls, blinked in surprise as she accepted the chocolates. "Wait, you're not saving these for Michael? Why would I?" I said calmly. "Didn't I tell you? I have nothing to do with him anymore." In my past life, Michael had once casually said he envied someone in his unit for having imported candy. I immediately pulled some strings to buy him the most popular chocolates from overseas. But the next day, I saw the entire box in Emma White's hands. When she noticed me looking, she smirked smugly. "Oh, this? I told Michael I have low blood sugar, so he just gave it to me. If I still knowingly threw myself into that same fate again, I'd truly have lost my mind." Seeing how serious I was, my roommates finally stopped insisting. They said a quick goodbye and went off together to the auditorium to watch the show. With a rare day off and no training, I tidied up and decided to head out for a walk. Maybe buy some medicine to make it look like I really had a cold. I wandered around all day, and by the time the sky began to darken, the performance had ended. As I started heading back to the dorm, I realized once again, this world really is small. Just as I turned the corner, I ran into Michael Shaw, who had just finished his performance. He was pushing his bicycle and walking side by side with Emma White, escorting her back to the dormitory. I stood at the corner quietly watching the two of them. Even though there was half a meter of space between them, anyone with half a brain could see the subtle intimacy in the air. I pulled at the corner of my lips and gave a cold, mocking smile. How blind I must have been in my last life to cling to him so desperately. The image of me lying alone in that nursing home came flooding back, and that suffocating feeling wrapped around my throat once again. Forget it. Better not to see. Better not to think. I turned, ready to leave, when a sudden gust of wind blew by. A metal sign beside me rattled loudly, as if deliberately announcing my presence. Both of them looked up at the sound, and the moment Emma glanced back, she saw me. When Michael's eyes met mine, his expression stiffened instantly. His fingers tightened around the handlebar, his voice trembling slightly as he called out, "Grace!" He couldn't even look me in the eye, stammering without forming a complete sentence. I understood exactly what he was afraid of. Michael was an orphan, and it was only thanks to my family's financial support that he had been able to pursue his dreams and join the performing troupe successfully. He must have been scared that I'd use this situation to threaten him or cut off his support. But he never understood I wasn't that kind of person, and neither were my parents. Emma took a firm step forward, tugging at Michael's sleeve to block him behind her, glaring at me defensively. "Captain Grace, do you need something?" The way she stood there made me look like some cruel villain trying to break up a happy couple. And honestly, in my last life I had been that foolish. The first time I caught them together, I'd stormed up to confront them in tears. Before I could even get a word out, Emma burst into sobs right there, making it look like I was the one bullying her. But now I had no time or energy for that kind of nonsense. "No, nothing. Just passing by," I said lightly, waving my hand and turning to leave. Michael suddenly called out, his voice tinged with panic. "Grace, wait, don't misunderstand. Emma and I just happened to be walking the same way. You don't need to explain." I cut him off, glancing back over my shoulder. "You can walk with whoever you want. It has nothing to do with me." Emma frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "The literal meaning," I said coolly, the corners of my mouth twitching slightly before I looked back at Michael. "Michael Shaw, don't worry. From now on, I won't chase after you anymore. And I won't mention anything about you to my parents. You can be with whoever you like. We'll go our separate ways." Michael froze, his lips parting slightly, but no words came out. I didn't care to see his reaction or hers. I turned and walked away. The wind brushed against my face as I exhaled slowly. At least this time I ended everything before the tragedy could even begin. When I returned to the dorm, Mary Lee and the others were gathered around my chocolate box, happily eating. As soon as I walked in, Jenny leaned toward me with a sly grin. "Captain, we heard you ran into Michael Shaw. Why didn't you talk to him for a bit?" "What's there to talk about?" I said flatly, grabbing a piece of chocolate and popping it into my mouth. "Don't mention him again." The room fell silent for a second. "Wait, you're serious?" Mary touched my forehead. "No fever. Did you hit your head or something? Since when do you say crazy things like that?" I brushed her hand away. "Of course I'm serious. I finally figured it out. He doesn't like me. Why should I force him? There are plenty of men in this world. I'll find someone who truly connects with me. Someone worth giving my heart to." For a moment the room went quiet, then suddenly burst into cheers. "Finally, that's what we've been waiting for." Jenny quickly flattered me, handing over a cup of hot water. "Captain, you have no idea how long we've been wanting to say this. Michael Shaw never really cared about you. Just the other day, I even saw him hand that handkerchief you gave him to Emma. She used it to wipe her sweat." I chewed on the chocolate, feeling nothing. In my past life, that kind of thing would have kept me awake all night in anger. But now there was only one thought in my mind. What does that have to do with me? "Oh right, Captain." Mary suddenly added, "I heard the college entrance exam is being reinstated. Have you thought about what you're going to do?" The news that the college entrance exam was about to be reinstated was truly encouraging, but my heart wasn't in it. What I really wanted was to stay here, to serve at the grassroots level, to build my life where I could be useful, even at the border if needed. I hesitated, then shook my head. I haven't really thought about it yet. Honestly, I kind of want to stay here and keep serving. Mary Lee patted me on the shoulder. Whatever you decide is fine. The fact that you've finally gotten over Michael Shaw is already a huge step forward. I'm not worried about you anymore. I smiled faintly but said nothing. After all, having lived a second life, only a fool would keep wallowing in the same mud pit. However, before I could fully settle into training, a new announcement came from the unit. There would be a full-scale mountain climbing drill, and the performing troupe would be joining us. I stared at the notice, frowning hard, every part of me resisting the idea. But as squad leader, I couldn't get out of it. Pretending to be sick again wasn't an option. I had no choice but to grit my teeth and go. On the day of the climb, the performers showed up in neatly pressed uniforms. Even from afar, I could hear their cheerful chatter. "Well, if it isn't Captain Grace," came a familiar voice. Emma White appeared out of nowhere, her eyes half-lidded with disdain. "Didn't you say you'd given up on Michael Shaw? What are you doing here?" I didn't even bother to look at her. Adjusting the strap of my backpack, I charged ahead, not wanting to have anything to do with either of them. My physical endurance had always been among the best in the unit. The slope wasn't difficult for me at all. Before long, I'd left them far behind. Halfway up, I stopped at a pavilion to rest, sipping some water. Behind me, I suddenly heard rustling and a faint voice calling, "Wait up." I turned and saw Michael Shaw clambering up the hill, using both his hands and feet. When he finally reached the pavilion, he bent over with his hands on his knees, breathing heavily. Why is he here? Shouldn't he be using this opportunity to get closer to Emma now that I'm out of the way? I screwed the cap back onto my canteen. "What do you want?" He looked up, his face still flushed. "You were walking so fast. Are you still mad at me?" "I just wanted to tell you that there's really nothing between me and Emma that day." "Stop." I raised my hand to cut him off. "I already told you you can be with whoever you want. You don't owe me an explanation." In his haste to step closer, his foot landed on a cracked stone slab. It gave way beneath him and he fell hard with a cry. Michael hit the ground solidly. The edge of a sharp rock sliced across his ankle, leaving a long, deep gash. Blood began to pour out almost instantly. Instinctively, I reached out to help him, but just before my fingers brushed his sleeve, I froze and pulled my hand back sharply. In my last life, that single moment of compassion had tied me to 40 years of misery. Michael looked up at my withdrawn hand, his face filled with disbelief. I took 2 steps back and turned away. "Wait here," I said. "I'll go get Emma." By the time Emma and I hurried back, Michael's face was pale as paper. When he saw her, his eyes lit up. But the moment his gaze shifted to me, that light dimmed again. Emma, not wanting to lose face in front of me, immediately knelt down and started cleaning and dressing his wound with brisk efficiency before helping him up. Michael leaned on her shoulder but kept his eyes on me. "Captain Grace, aren't you coming with us?" If this had been me in my past life, I would have been frantic, insisting on going with him, terrified he might get worse. But now that I'd let him go, I found there wasn't even a trace of worry or tenderness left in me. I shook my head calmly. "No need. I should stay with the main group. You'll be fine with Emma taking care of you." There was something complicated in his eyes, something I couldn't read, but I didn't care. I urged Emma to take him to the hospital and went back down the mountain. By the time I returned to camp, it was already dark. Mary Lee was squatting by the door, glancing around anxiously. When she spotted me, she jumped up. "Captain, everyone knows about Michael Shaw getting hurt. They're saying you stood by and did nothing." "It doesn't matter," I said, taking a sip of water. "Let them say what they want." Mary wrung her hands nervously. "They're saying you did it on purpose, that you left him there so Emma could step in." I nearly spat out my water. "What kind of nonsense is that?" She blinked then grinned. "But hey, the performing troops are all praising you now. They're calling you generous and selfless. The commander even said he's planning to commend you publicly." I set down my water bottle and couldn't help but laugh. Well, good. In my last life, I was nothing but a lovesick fool. In this life, I'd finally learned how to carry myself with some real dignity. Michael Shaw's injury wasn't serious, but he still stayed in the hospital for 2 days. When our unit organized a visit to see him, I deliberately walked at the end of the group. The ward was filled with gifts and care packages. He was sitting up in bed, his ankle wrapped in gauze, looking perfectly fine. Several of the older members of the troupe crowded around, talking over one another as they expressed their concern. I stood quietly behind them, nodding politely like an outsider with no real interest. When the small talk finally died down, the troop leader announced it was time to go. I turned to leave with everyone when Michael suddenly called out, "Captain Grace, could I talk to you alone for a minute?" The room fell silent. Mary Lee shot me a look, her brows wiggling mischievously, while the others began to file out one by one. After the door closed, Michael reached under his pillow and pulled out a letter, running his fingers along the envelope's edge over and over again. The sun warmed his face as he called out, "Grace, our troop just put together a new program. Want to come see it?" I was leading new recruits through drills and didn't even turn around. "No time." He hesitated, then tried again, smiling nervously. "Well, I've been cooking lately. Learned a new recipe. Maybe I could." I cut him off sharply. "No need. The food here is good enough." He stopped in his tracks. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him standing there awkwardly, clutching the lunchbox, not knowing what to do with himself. He looked inexplicably aggrieved. In my previous life, if I'd seen that expression on his face, my heart would have softened instantly, and I would have agreed to anything just to make him feel better. But now I couldn't even be bothered to look him in the eye. After training, he blocked my way again on the path back to the dorm, pretending to run into me by chance while obviously trying to pry about my future plans. The moonlight spilled across his face, highlighting his sharp features, the same handsome look I used to love so much. "Grace," he said with a small smile, "I heard you gave up on taking the college exam, that you plan to stay here, serve at the grassroots level." I gave a nonchalant hum. "Yeah, I've decided to stay too," he said, his eyes glimmering. "You were right. The grassroots need young people like us." I almost laughed out loud. In my last life, he'd done everything possible to leave for the provincial capital. If he'd had the scores, he would have been gone in a heartbeat. And now he was talking about rooting himself in the grassroots. What a joke. But I didn't expose him. I simply nodded and prepared to walk away. Michael Shaw was a proud man, maybe too proud. After trying several times to make peace with me and getting turned down each time, it was clear his ego was starting to bruise. As I passed him, he suddenly called out sharply, "Grace Chan, what's wrong with you?" I stopped and looked at him calmly. "Nothing. I thought I made everything clear that day in the hospital. As for anything else, I really have nothing more to say." And with that, I turned and walked away without looking back. When I returned to the dorm, Mary Lee was sitting on her bed cracking sunflower seeds and reading the newspaper. I ripped the calendar off the wall and asked, "Mary, when's the deadline for submitting college applications?" "The day after tomorrow," she said, blinking at me in confusion. Then her eyes widened in realization. "Grace, you've made up your mind, haven't you?" I didn't even answer. I grabbed my jacket and ran out. Lou, the young clerk from the training office, was just about to lock the door when I rushed in and stopped him. "Lou, give me another college application form." Startled, he hesitated for a second but handed it over. I leaned over the windowsill in the corridor and began to fill it out right there. On the first choice line, I wrote Tsinghua University, Department of Mechanical Engineering. Lou's eyes went wide. "Captain, are you crazy? You think you can get into that?" I signed my name in bold, confident strokes. How would I know if I don't try? By the time I turned in the form, it was already dark. I walked slowly back to the dorm, and from a distance, I saw Michael Shaw still standing under the streetlight. The lunchbox he'd been carrying earlier was gone. When he saw me, his eyes lit up and he started to come over. But I turned down another path, circling around the training field instead. Inside the dorm, Mary was flipping through my review materials, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Captain, are you serious about this? Wow, you're really something. Quiet for so long and then boom, you make a move like that." I didn't answer. I just opened my physics textbook. I knew how hard it would be to have even the slightest chance. I'd have to work 10 times, 100 times harder than anyone else. But as long as I tried, there was still a chance. If I didn't, there would be none at all. And besides, Michael's words still echoed in my mind. How he said he wanted to stay here. Well, then I'd do the opposite. I'd leave. I'd go far, far away from him. I refused to let the tragedy of my past life repeat itself. No matter what, I wouldn't live that nightmare again. Outside, faint footsteps echoed in the hallway, followed by a soft knock on the door. Mary and I exchanged a look but didn't move. After a while, the footsteps faded away. I pushed open the window. Under the streetlight, I saw a familiar figure walking away slowly, growing smaller and smaller until it disappeared into the night. I closed the window and turned back to my desk, flipping to the next page of my book. This time I'll live for myself. When the troop leader found out I had registered for the college exam, he smiled and patted my shoulder. Good girl. Ambitious too. If our troop produces a college student, that'll be something to be proud of. I scratched my head awkwardly. Thank you for the encouragement, sir. But could you please keep it between us for now until the results come out? Truthfully, I just didn't want Michael to know. He was too unpredictable. Of course, the leader said cheerfully. But if you actually get in, you owe me a meal. I laughed and nodded. Deal. Feeling good, I left his office. But the moment I stepped out of the building, I stopped short. There, under the old locust tree, sat Michael Shaw, clumsily knitting a sweater. I didn't even need to think about it. Of course, the sweater was for Emma White. She hovered around him like a fly, her shrill voice carrying even from a distance. Michael, what's gotten into you? Since when does a man like you start knitting sweaters? Oh, this pattern's beautiful. You're making it for me, aren't you? Blue looks perfect on me. Michael didn't even glance at her. His head stayed down as the bamboo needles moved slowly back and forth in his hands. I was planning to take a detour and avoid the whole scene, but just then he suddenly looked up and spotted me. Grace. He stood up so fast that the knitting needles fell to the ground with a clatter. Before I could react, he grabbed the half-finished sweater and ran toward me. Emma's face instantly darkened. I froze, caught off guard as Michael cheerfully held the sweater up against me. Here, see if it fits. I picked sky blue on purpose. It complements your skin tone. You'll look great in it. I instinctively stepped back, and the yarn snagged on one of my buttons, pulling out a long loose thread. What a surprise. Michael Shaw actually made something for me. Michael. Emma rushed forward and grabbed his sleeve. What's that supposed to mean? You made that sweater for Grace? Why are you giving it to her? Michael's expression shifted. He jerked his arm free from her grip. And what business is it of yours? Grace and her family helped me get into the performing troupe. She's given me so many gifts over the years. What's wrong with me making her a sweater in return? Not only was I stunned, but even Emma looked completely shocked. After all, it was the first time he'd ever raised his voice at her. Her face turned red with anger. Weren't you the one who said you couldn't stand how she clung to you? And now you're the one chasing after her, knitting her a sweater. When did I ever say that? Michael snapped. Emma, stop making things up. Their argument grew louder and louder, echoing across the yard. My head began to ache from the noise. I watched them, him red in the face, her shouting back at him. And all I could think was how in my last life I would have been ecstatic to see this. I probably would have grinned for 3 days straight, but now it all just felt meaningless. I turned to leave. The tension in the yarn finally snapped with a sharp pop. Michael noticed me walking away and immediately stopped arguing. Grace, he called, voice urgent. Once I finish the sweater, I'll bring it to you. I waved a hand without turning around. Give it to Emma. I don't need it. His footsteps faltered, and then I heard Emma's bitter mocking tone behind me. Serves you right. Trying so hard only to get rejected. You should have just made it for me. Shut up, he muttered. But I didn't stick around to hear more. I quickened my pace, turned a corner, and left their voices behind. Not long after, Mary Lee popped up out of nowhere, her face brimming with gossip. Captain, I saw everything just now. I shot her a glare. Saw what? Did you finish your practice drills? She shrank her neck and whispered conspiratorially. But seriously, Captain, you're really not going to take that sweater? I heard Michael spent several nights working on it. His fingers were bleeding. I froze mid-step. For a brief second, an image from my past life flashed before my eyes. Me staying up late, hand-copying his sheet music until blisters formed on my fingers, only for him to turn around and give those pages to Emma. Maybe this was karma. It has nothing to do with me, I said indifferently. Let's go review our lessons. Maybe it was the stress of juggling training and studying. Or maybe it was how often Michael had been showing up lately. But that night I actually dreamed about him. Dreamed about the past. In the dream I was just over 20, wearing a brand new military uniform, standing nervously outside his family's house. Traditionally, women weren't supposed to show up for marriage discussions. But I loved Michael too much. I was terrified that if I didn't act soon, I'd lose him. So I begged my mother to come along, hoping she could talk to his family, remind them of the years our families had known each other, maybe put in a good word for me. From inside the house, I could hear my mother's voice rising and falling as she spoke with Michael's cousin. "Our Grace really loves Michael," she said warmly. Through a narrow gap in the door, I could see him sitting quietly in the corner of the living room, staring blankly at the floor. He wore a light blue shirt that made his skin look even fairer, but his eyes kept drifting toward the doorway, looking anywhere but inside. I knew exactly who he was waiting for. Emma White, my mother, was all smiles as she spoke, her tone warm and eager. "Michael, Grace has been doing wonderfully in the army. She's such a good girl, and she's always been so kind to you. What do you think about that?" Michael sat with his head lowered, silent, his lips pressed into a thin, tight line. That scene repeated itself countless times. I had begged every relative I could, my aunts, cousins, even distant family friends, to go speak on my behalf to help propose a match to the Shaw family. And every single time Michael would act the same way, not agreeing but not refusing either. Just sitting there with that expressionless face while everyone else talked around him. All my noisy, desperate attempts at a proposal had only frightened him and driven Emma White into a corner. She wanted to marry him too. But Michael's family had refused, saying her family couldn't even afford a proper dowry. So she took a desperate path. For the sake of a workplace injury compensation payment, she climbed up to the third-floor window, let out a piercing scream and jumped. She broke her leg on impact. Emma's shrill cry echoed in my ears, jolting me awake. I sat up abruptly, drenched in a cold sweat. Dawn hadn't yet broken. The soft sound of my roommate's breathing filled the dark dorm room. But the moment I closed my eyes, the images returned. Michael on our wedding night, sitting in the bridal chamber. The bright red groom's suit I'd carefully prepared was shredded to ribbons by his scissors. The sharp tip of the blade pointed at me as his face twisted with fury. "If it weren't for you," he shouted, "Emma wouldn't have rushed to raise a dowry. She wouldn't have jumped. It's all your fault. You ruined her life." I opened my mouth but no sound came out. On what should have been the happiest night of my life, my new husband looked at me like I was his greatest enemy. The dream spun faster, time leaping ahead to the day our daughter was born. I had been in labor for nearly 24 hours and almost didn't make it. When the nurse placed that wrinkled little baby in my arms, my hands trembled with joy. But years later, when my daughter learned to write, the first character she wrote wasn't Mom or Dad. Michael held her small hand and carefully guided her to write a single word. "Emma. This is your Aunt Emma's name," he said gently, his voice soft and affectionate in a way that cut me like a knife. "Do you remember it?" "I remember," our daughter replied innocently. "But Daddy, who's Aunt Emma?" At that moment, his expression softened completely. He went on to tell her a romantic story, his story with Emma, painting it as some tragic, beautiful love that fate had torn apart. Later, after Emma got off work, he would take our daughter to meet her. I still remember that day vividly. He had put on his new shirt, even sprayed cologne. Standing by the road, he held our daughter's hand as she carried a small bunch of wildflowers. When Emma appeared, our 10-year-old girl ran to her laughing and threw her arms around her neck as if they were the real family and I was just some outsider. Michael never tired of telling our daughter those stories, making her believe that I had stolen her father through scheming and deceit. So she grew close to Emma, treating her like a second mother. I told myself to endure it, that if I was just a little kinder, a little more patient, maybe they would eventually see me differently. But I was wrong. When I turned 60, sick and frail in a hospital bed, Michael didn't hesitate. After hearing about my condition, he told the hospital to stop treatment, packed up a few of my old clothes, and sent me to a nursing home. In the end, I lay there, too weak to move, listening to the nurses gossiping in the hallway. "Did you hear? Mr. Shaw is getting married." Of course, to that teacher, Miss White. "They've been in love for 40 years. It's finally happening. And his daughter's so happy running around helping with the preparations." Then the harsh beeping of the monitor filled the room. I stared up at the ceiling at the mold-stained tiles growing dimmer and dimmer. The last thing I heard was the doctor's voice. "Prepare the death certificate. Where's her family?" No one answered. "Captain. Captain." Mary Lee's voice dragged me back to reality. I opened my eyes and realized my pillow was soaked with tears. My throat tasted faintly of blood. Mary handed me a towel. "You had a nightmare?" I wiped my face and forced a small laugh. "Not a nightmare," I said softly. "A revelation." I got out of bed, pulled my study materials from the drawer, and sat down though my hands were still trembling. "Mary," I said, "starting today I'm studying all night every night." She stared at me wide-eyed. "Grace, what happened to you?" I didn't answer her. I just grabbed my pen and slashed through the countdown numbers on my exam calendar. The sound of the pen tearing through paper reminded me of the snap from my dream. Michael Shaw picking up those broken scissors on our wedding night. In my past life I'd been utterly foolish. I truly believed that sincerity could win someone's heart. But even as I lay dying, no one came to see me. After a long silence, I suddenly said, "Mary, do you know what the dumbest thing a person can do is?" She blinked, startled. "What?" Falling into the same pit twice, I muttered. I buried my head in my textbook. The red-inked words, "Final sprint to the college entrance exam," glared back at me. If I ever make the same mistake again in this life. I froze mid-sentence because outside my window I saw Michael Shaw standing below, looking up at me. In the pale morning light, his tears gleamed, just like the candle wax dripping down on our wedding night all those years ago. With a sharp pull, I yanked the curtain shut. The hook snapped off with the force. To hell with his tears. Hadn't I shed enough of my own for him in my last life? For a long time after that, my days were nothing but training and studying. I barely had the time or energy to deal with him. Then, the morning before the college entrance exam, I woke before dawn, quietly slinging my bag over my shoulder as I prepared to leave the dorm. Mary insisted on walking me out, but I pressed her back down onto her bunk. "Don't wake the others. I'll be back once it's over." Just as I reached the gate, I heard hurried footsteps behind me. My stomach dropped even before I turned around. "Grace," Michael called, jogging toward me. His jacket was half on, half off. His hair a mess. Under the morning light, his eyes were impossibly bright. He stopped, panting slightly. "Why are you leaving so early? I can take you later." "It's fine," I said casually. "Just running an errand in town. I'll be back soon." "So early," he said, frowning, then suddenly reached out to grab the strap of my backpack. He shoved 2 warm steamed buns into it. "At least take these. Be safe, okay? Come back soon." I didn't answer. I turned and walked away. When I glanced back after some distance, he was still standing there, waving hard, the faint outline of a smile on his face. The exam site was set up at the county high school. I arrived a day early to get familiar with the surroundings. That night I couldn't sleep, so I got up and worked through another set of practice tests. After 3 long days of exams, I finally returned to the troop. As expected, Michael was the first to rush over. "Grace, you finished your business?" "Yeah." I brushed past him toward the dorms. He jogged to keep up. "The performing troupe has a show next week. I saved the best seat for you." "Can't. Busy." I cut him off coldly without even turning around. Conversations like that repeated over and over. He kept finding excuses to approach me, bringing fruit, asking about my training schedule, pretending to borrow books. And every time I replied with the same curt tone, the same indifference he once showed me, until one afternoon, chaos suddenly broke out across the camp. Mary burst into the training field, waving a letter in her trembling hands. "Captain, your acceptance letter, it's from Tinghua." Everyone swarmed around me, cheering and shouting. My fingers shook slightly as I took the golden envelope from her. The crowd erupted in excitement, some trying to lift me into the air. "Captain Grace, you're amazing. You have to treat us to a feast." "What's all the commotion about?" That familiar voice cut through the laughter. Michael pushed his way through the group, still smiling until his eyes landed on what I was holding. The smile froze on his face. "That's an acceptance letter?" I nodded, slipping the envelope carefully into my bag. His eyes turned red as he stepped closer, his voice trembling. "So that day you said you were going to town. You were actually taking the college exam? I didn't answer, but my silence said enough. His tears spilled over in an instant. His composure crumbled. Why didn't you tell me? Grace-chan, did I do something wrong? Why are you so cold to me now? Why are you running so far away? Do you really have to leave? He finally realized, but far, far too late. He stared at me in disbelief. So all this time you've been avoiding me. The air around us went dead silent. Everyone was watching him with his voice cracking and his expression on the verge of breaking apart. I let out a calm sigh. There's no reason. I just don't like you anymore. I want to stay away from you. His tears fell even harder. His lips trembled as he stammered. But I stayed here for you. I wanted to stay at the grassroots because of you. Tears streamed down his face one after another, but I felt nothing. I didn't reach up to wipe them away like I used to. That part of me was gone. There's no need to live for someone else, I said quietly. If you want to stay, then stay. If you want to leave, then leave. Your life belongs to you. He clearly hadn't expected me to be so indifferent. Michael Shaw looked at me for a long moment, then turned and ran out of the room without another word. I didn't chase after him. Some mistakes, some people. You should have cut ties with them from the very beginning. I finally stepped through the gates of Singa University, just as I dreamed. But I didn't forget where I came from, or what I wanted to do. During my time at school, I threw myself into my studies. And after graduation, I sent my resume straight back to our old troupe. Years later, I returned, not as the same naive girl I once was, but as a new recruit starting over. When Mary Lee saw me again, she burst into tears, hugging me so tightly I could barely breathe. She was even more emotional than the day I'd left. I laughed and stuffed the souvenirs I'd brought from Beijing into her arms. What are you crying for? You're embarrassing me. Come on. Tonight dinner's on me. And make sure to invite the commander too. I still owe him a meal. That evening, the few of us gathered like the old days, eating, laughing, drinking until dawn. Over dinner, the commander mentioned Michael Shaw. After you left, he started studying too. He said he wanted to get into the same place as you, but, well, he didn't quite have the aptitude. Tried a few times, never made it. He sighed before continuing. Emma White eventually said she wanted to marry him. At first, he didn't want to agree, but after you were gone so long and never came back, he got disheartened and gave in. The thing is, their marriage wasn't exactly happy. Michael would often blame Emma, saying, if she hadn't come between the two of you, maybe you wouldn't have left him. I gave a small laugh. Sounds familiar. He's still using the same excuses. The commander nodded. Eventually, the two of them started fighting constantly. I heard they even got physical once. You know how strict discipline is in the army. That kind of thing doesn't go unnoticed. They were both discharged and moved to Lynn County together. No one's heard much since. I stuffed my mouth with food and quickly filled both the commander's and Mary's bowls, waving my chopsticks with a grin. All right, enough about them. We finally got together again. No need to ruin it with unpleasant talk. I raised my glass high. Tonight, let's toast to my new life. They laughed and lifted their glasses too. Cheers.